Welcome back to Crazy HOA Moments. The board called it compliance and I called it extortion. You have one chance to comply before the next notice becomes a lien. That is what Amy Johnson screamed at me from the edge of my driveway while pointing her phone at the thin icy glaze on my front walkway, and I knew the fine would hit my account before sunset unless I fixed it in front of witnesses. I gripped my snow shovel like a shield and tried to keep my voice level, but my heart hammered because I work rotating shifts as a firefighter and I cannot afford to miss custody time over HOA hearings and delays. Amy tapped her portable radio earpiece and said the record was already uploading to the Blue Light Ridge Community Association portal, and I could see a couple on the porch next door watching like it was a show. Amy said the violation window closed at 5, and if I did not have salt down and the glaze scraped before then, she would file the second notice, and the fine would double. I asked her when the first notice was sent, and she said it was in the portal yesterday afternoon, but I had been on a 48-hour shift and never saw it. She smiled and said that was not her problem, and I felt the cold seep through my gloves as I realized she had timed this to catch me off guard. The storm warning said heavy snow starts tonight, and I had to clear and document everything before dark, or I would be buried under both the weather and her enforcement blitz. I asked her to wait while I checked my phone, and she said no, the clock was already running. I pulled out my phone and opened the portal, and sure enough, there was a notice timestamped 16 hours ago with a photo of my walkway showing a barely visible icy patch. I scrolled down and saw 3 other notices from the past 2 weeks, all about snow pile placement and plow damage, and every single one had been filed while I was at the station. Amy said you signed the covenants, now you live the covenants, and I wanted to throw the shovel into a snowbank, but I forced myself to stay calm. My next-door neighbor, a calm guy named Eric who had been dealing with Amy for years, stepped off his porch and walked over. He said he saw my walkway this morning and it was fine, and Amy whipped around and told him to stay out of it or she would file a complaint about his snowblower noise. Eric ignored her and said he would be a witness if I needed one, and Amy said witnesses do not matter when the portal has time-stamped photos. I asked her if she personally took the photo and she hesitated for half a second before saying the enforcement team rotates inspections. That hesitation told me everything, and I made a mental note to dig into the metadata later. Amy said I had 3 hours to comply and she turned to leave, but then she stopped and said you should have read the rules before you moved in, sweetheart, and I felt my jaw tighten. I let her think I was cornered because my trump card needed her to overreach, and I was not about to show my hand while she still had the power to escalate. Amy pulled a frozen clipboard from under her coat and tried to write something on a printed form, but the clip snapped loudly in the cold and the paper fluttered loose. She cursed and grabbed the sheet before it blew away, then stuffed it back under her coat and said she would email the formal citation instead. I asked her what the fine amount was, and she said $300 for the first offense, $600 if I did not fix it by 5, and a lien filing fee of $200 if it went to the third notice. I did the math in my head and realized she was building a paper trail to justify a lien, which would tank my refinancing plan and cost me thousands in legal fees to clear. Eric said that sounded like extortion, and Amy said it sounded like enforcement, and she walked back toward the street. I told Eric I appreciated the support, and he said Amy had been pulling this on half the block, targeting people who work nights or travel for work so they miss the narrow compliance windows. He said the management company had been sending contradictory clearing instructions like a trap, with one email saying to pile snow on the curb strip, and another email 2 days later saying curb strip piles block drainage and violate code. I asked him if he had copies of those emails, and he said yes, and he also had a recording of an HOA meeting where Amy admitted she was trying to clean up the neighborhood by pushing out the renters and shift workers. I felt a surge of hope and asked him to send me everything, and he said he would, but he warned me that Amy had a vendetta and she would not stop at fines. I went inside and pulled up the portal on my laptop, and I saw that the community was full of icy sidewalk photos and accusations, with Amy commenting on every post and tagging people for violations. There were threads about cars parked slightly over driveway seams because of ice, about snow pile height, about salt stains on walkways, and every single thread had Amy saying you signed the covenants, now you live the covenants. I screenshot everything and started a folder, then I checked the metadata on the photo she had used for my notice. The timestamp was legit, but the GPS coordinates were off by half a block, which meant either the photo was taken from the wrong house or someone had doctored the metadata to make it look like my property. I made another note and kept digging. My phone buzzed with an email from the management company, and it was a new winter clearing directive saying all walkways must be cleared within 2 hours of snowfall ending, and any icy glaze must be treated with salt or sand within 1 hour of detection. The email was dated today, but the rule citation referenced a handbook revision from last month, and I checked my old emails and found the original rule said 24 hours. I felt my blood pressure spike and I forwarded the email to Eric. Then I called the management company and asked to speak to someone about the rule change. The receptionist said the manager was out and I could leave a message, so I did, and I made sure to say I was documenting everything for a potential legal review. I looked out the window and saw a tow truck circling the block, and my stomach dropped. I grabbed my coat and ran outside, and sure enough, the truck was slowing down near my driveway. I walked over and asked the driver what he was doing, and he said he had a call about a vehicle blocking the sidewalk. I looked at my car and saw it was parked slightly over the driveway seam because of the ice, and I realized Amy had called in a tow threat to pressure me while I was scrambling to fix the walkway. The driver said he was just doing his job, and I said I understood, but the car was on my property and not blocking anything. He shrugged and said he would circle back in an hour if the complaint was still active. I went back inside and texted Eric, and he replied saying Amy had done the same thing to another neighbor last month, and the tow company eventually refused to come back after the neighbor threatened to sue. He said the key was to document everything and make the tow driver see that the complaint was bogus before he hooked the car. I asked him if he could come over and be a witness again, and he said yes, and he also said he had a portable battery pack I could use to keep my phone charged while I filmed. I thanked him and grabbed my shovel. Then I went out to the walkway and started scraping the icy glaze. The temperature was dropping and the wind was picking up, and I could see fresh snow starting to fall. The storm was coming early. I worked fast, scraping and salting every inch of the walkway while my phone recorded the whole process. I made sure to get timestamps and clear shots of the work, and I even filmed the tow truck circling again. Amy walked past on the opposite side of the street and stopped to watch, and I saw her pull out her phone and start recording too. I ignored her and kept working, but I could feel her eyes on me and I knew she was waiting for me to slip up. Eric came over with the battery pack and handed it to me. Then he stood on his porch and watched, so Amy knew she had a witness. The frozen clipboard clip snapped again as Amy tried to take notes, and I heard her mutter something under her breath. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and satisfying payback. By 4:30, I had the walkway cleared and salted, and I took a final video showing the surface was safe and dry. I uploaded everything to the portal with a timestamp and a note saying the work was completed before the 5 o'clock deadline, and I sent copies to Eric and to my own email for backup. Amy posted a comment saying the work was incomplete because there was still a small patch near the curb, and I replied with a close-up photo showing the patch was actually a shadow from the streetlight. She did not respond, but 10 minutes later I got an email from the management company saying my account had been flagged for a hearing because of repeated violations and failure to maintain property standards. I read the email twice and realized it was a form letter, and the violations listed did not match the dates or descriptions from the portal. Someone had backdated the notices to manufacture a pattern. I called Eric and told him what I found, and he said he was not surprised. He said the management company had been working with Amy to build cases against anyone she targeted, and he had audio from an HOA meeting where she said the goal was to force out the people who did not fit the neighborhood vision. I asked him to send me the audio, and he said he would, but he also warned me that if I played it publicly, Amy would claim it was edited or taken out of context. I said I needed something ironclad, and he said he knew a former board member who had left because of Amy and might be willing to go on the record. I asked him to reach out, and he said he would try, but the former board member was nervous about retaliation. The snow started falling harder, and I knew I had maybe 2 hours before the walkway would need clearing again. I went inside and pulled up the neighborhood group chat, and I saw a new post from Amy with a photo of my driveway and a caption saying some people think the rules do not apply to them during a storm. The post had 20 comments already, with half the people agreeing and half pushing back, and I could see the thread turning into a dumpster fire. I screenshot the post and added it to my folder. Then I posted a reply with my timestamped video and a polite note saying I had cleared the walkway before the deadline and uploaded proof to the portal. Amy replied saying the video did not show the curb patch and I was twisting the facts, and I replied with the shadow photo again. She stopped responding, but I knew she was just regrouping. At 6, I got a knock on the door, and I opened it to find Amy standing there with 2 other people I did not recognize. She said she was conducting a compliance inspection and needed to photograph my walkway again, and I said no. She was not stepping on my property without a warrant or a scheduled appointment. She said the covenants gave the HOA inspection rights, and I was obstructing enforcement. And I said the covenants also required 24 hours notice and a neutral third party, which she did not have. One of the people behind her started filming, and I pulled out my own phone and filmed back, and Amy said I was creating a hostile environment. I said she was trespassing, and I was calling the police if she did not leave, and she hesitated for a moment before turning around and walking away. The 2 people followed her, and I heard one of them say something about escalating to the board. I closed the door and took a breath. Then I checked the group chat and saw Amy had posted again, this time saying I had threatened her and refused a lawful inspection. The post was blowing up with comments, and I could see the narrative shifting against me, so I posted my video of the interaction with a calm explanation of what happened. Eric commented in support, and a few other neighbors did too, but the damage was done. Amy had painted me as uncooperative and aggressive, and now the board would have cover to escalate. I texted Eric and asked if he had heard from the former board member, and he said yes. The person was willing to talk but wanted to meet in person first. I said I could do that tomorrow if the storm let up, and Eric said he would set it up. The snow kept falling, and by 8 I had to go out and clear the walkway again. I worked fast, filming the whole process, and I saw the tow truck circle past one more time. The driver slowed down and looked at my car. Then he drove off without stopping. I finished clearing and went back inside, and I checked the portal and saw another notice had been filed, this time for snow pile height exceeding the maximum. I looked at the photo and saw it was from a different angle, and the pile looked maybe 2 inches taller than the limit, but only because the photo was taken from a low angle that distorted the perspective. I replied with a level measurement photo and a note saying the pile was compliant, and I filed a formal complaint about harassment and improper enforcement. The management company sent an auto reply saying my complaint had been received and would be reviewed within 10 business days. I did not sleep much that night because I kept checking the portal and the group chat waiting for the next move. At 4 in the morning, I saw a new post from Amy saying the board was holding an emergency meeting at 9 to discuss my violations and vote on a formal hearing. I screenshot the post and texted Eric, and he replied a few minutes later saying he would be there and he had sent my contact info to the former board member. I asked him what the person had said, and he replied that they had a certified statement describing Amy's pattern and motive, and it was detailed enough to blow up her credibility if presented correctly. I felt a rush of relief and asked Eric to thank them for me, and he said to be ready because Amy was going to fight dirty. At 6, I went out to clear the walkway again, and I saw fresh snow covering everything I had done the night before. The storm was worse than predicted, and the wind was blowing drifts across the driveway and into the street. I worked fast, shoveling and salting, and I filmed the whole process again. A car drove past and honked, and I looked up and saw it was the tow truck, and this time there was a second truck behind it. I stopped shoveling and pulled out my phone, and I saw Amy walking toward me from the other end of the block. She had her phone out and she was filming, and I knew this was the setup. She was going to claim I was blocking snow removal or creating a hazard, and she was going to have the tow trucks as backup. Amy stopped at the edge of my driveway and said the trucks were here to remove my vehicle for obstruction, and I said my car was parked legally on my own property and she had no authority. She said the HOA had a contract with the tow company for emergency snow removal, and my car was blocking the plow route. I looked at the street and saw no plow, and I pointed that out. She said the plow was delayed because of me, and I said that was absurd. The tow truck driver got out and walked over, and I asked him to show me the work order. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a request form with my address and a note saying vehicle blocking snow removal, and I took a photo of the screen. I asked him who filed the request, and he said it came through the HOA management portal, and I asked him if he verified the complaint before dispatching. He hesitated and said that was not his job. I told him the complaint was false and I had proof, and I pulled up my video from last night showing the car parked in the same spot with no obstruction. He watched the video and looked at Amy, and she said the video was old and did not reflect current conditions. I pulled up the metadata and showed him the timestamp, and he frowned. I said if he hooked my car, I would file a complaint with the city and his company would be liable, and he said he needed to call his supervisor. He walked back to the truck and got on the phone, and Amy said I was intimidating a contractor and she was adding that to the complaint list. I ignored her and kept filming, and Eric came out of his house and walked over. He said he saw the whole thing and he was a witness, and Amy told him to go back inside or she would file a noise complaint about his snowblower. The tow truck driver came back and said his supervisor told him to stand down until the complaint was verified, and he got in the truck and drove off. The second truck followed, and Amy said this was not over. She turned and walked away, tapping her radio earpiece, and I heard her say something about escalating to the police. I looked at Eric and he said she was bluffing, but I should be ready for anything. I finished clearing the walkway and went inside, and I checked the portal and saw a new notice saying I had interfered with HOA operations and created a safety hazard. The notice was filed at 6:15, which was less than 10 minutes after the tow trucks left, and I knew Amy had pre-written it before she even came to my house. I filed another complaint and attached all my videos and photos, and I sent a copy to Eric and to my own email. Then I checked the group chat and saw Amy had posted again, this time saying I had threatened a tow truck driver and blocked emergency snow removal. The post had 50 comments already and the thread was brutal, with people calling me selfish and dangerous. I posted my video and a calm explanation, but the damage was done. Amy had framed me as the villain, and now the neighborhood was turning against me. Eric posted in support and a few others did too, but I could see the majority siding with Amy. I closed the app and tried to focus on getting ready for the board meeting. At 9, I drove to the management company lobby, and I saw a dozen other homeowners already there. The board was meeting in a conference room, and Amy was standing near the door talking to the board president and pointing at her phone. I walked over and asked if I could sit in on the meeting, and the president said it was a closed session and I would be called in when it was my turn. I said I wanted to hear the discussion, and the president said that was not how it worked. I asked if I could at least submit my evidence in advance, and the president said I could email it to the management company, but there was no guarantee it would be reviewed before the vote. I felt my frustration spike and I said that was not a fair process, and the president said the process was outlined in the covenants, and if I did not like it, I could file an appeal after the hearing. I sat down in the lobby and pulled out my phone, and I saw Eric had texted saying the former board member was in the parking lot and wanted to talk before going in. I went outside and found a middle-aged man standing near a car, and he introduced himself as Tom and said he had been on the board for 3 years before resigning because of Amy. He said she had a pattern of targeting people she saw as not fitting the neighborhood, and she used the enforcement rules to build cases and force them out. He said he had a certified statement documenting 6 cases where Amy had fabricated violations or backdated notices, and he was willing to present it to the board if I thought it would help. I said it would absolutely help, but I warned him that Amy would attack his credibility. He said he expected that, but he was tired of watching her abuse the system. Tom and I went back inside, and Eric met us in the lobby. Tom said he had emailed the statement to the board president and the management company an hour ago, but he did not know if they had read it. Eric said we should assume they had not, and we needed to be ready to present it in person. I asked Tom how detailed the statement was, and he said it included dates, names, and specific violations that Amy had filed, along with evidence that the violations were either fabricated or the result of entrapment. He said the most damning part was an email chain where Amy discussed strategy with another board member about how to maximize fines and push out undesirables. I asked if he had copies, and he said yes, and he pulled a folder from his coat. The conference room door opened, and the board president called my name, and I stood up. Tom and Eric followed me, and the president said only I was allowed in the meeting. I said Tom was a former board member and Eric was a witness, and I wanted them present. The president said that was not standard procedure, and I said I was invoking my right to have representation. The president sighed and said fine, but they had to sit in the back and could not speak unless recognized. We walked in, and I saw Amy sitting at the table with 3 other board members, and she glared at Tom when she saw him. The president started the meeting by reading the list of violations, and it was longer than I expected. There were 8 notices filed over the past 3 weeks, covering everything from icy walkways to snow pile height to vehicle obstruction to interference with contractors. The president said the board was considering a formal hearing with potential fines totaling $2,000, plus a lien filing if I did not comply within 30 days. I asked if I could respond, and the president said yes. I had 5 minutes. I pulled out my phone and started playing the videos, and Amy interrupted and said videos could be edited and were not reliable evidence. I said the videos had metadata and timestamps, and I was happy to have them forensically analyzed. The president said that would not be necessary and I should continue. I walked through each violation and showed how the notices were either based on false information or filed during narrow windows when I was at work. I pointed out the contradictory clearing instructions from the management company, and I showed the emails proving the rules had been changed retroactively. Amy said I was making excuses and the covenants were clear. I said the covenants also required fair enforcement and proper notice, and neither had happened. The president said the board would take my evidence under advisement, and I said I had one more thing to present. I looked at Tom and he stood up and walked to the table. Tom said he was a former board member and he had a certified statement documenting a pattern of abuse by Amy Johnson. He handed the folder to the president and said the statement included emails, meeting minutes, and witness accounts showing that Amy had targeted multiple homeowners with fabricated or exaggerated violations in order to force them to sell or move. The president opened the folder and started reading, and Amy said the statement was a lie and Tom had been removed from the board for incompetence. Tom said he had resigned voluntarily and he had documentation proving that too. The president kept reading and I saw his expression change, and he looked at Amy and asked if she had anything to say. Amy said the statement was taken out of context and Tom was a disgruntled former member with an axe to grind. Tom said he expected that response, and he pulled out a second folder with email chains showing Amy coordinating with another board member to maximize enforcement against shift workers and renters. He said the emails included phrases like clean up the block and push out the transients, and he had multiple witnesses who could confirm the strategy. The president read the emails and his face went pale, and he looked at the other board members and said they needed to recess and review the materials. Amy said that was not necessary and the board should vote now, but the president ignored her and called a 15-minute recess. The board members left the room and I sat down next to Eric, and he said that went better than expected. Tom said he was not done yet, because he also had proof that the management company had been backdating notices at Amy's request. He said the former manager had quit over it and was willing to testify if needed. I asked him why he did not bring this up sooner and he said he had tried, but the board refused to listen and threatened him with legal action if he made the emails public. He said the only reason he was doing it now was because he heard I was fighting back and he wanted to help. The board came back and the president said they had reviewed the materials and they were suspending the hearing pending a full investigation. He said all pending fines against me were on hold and the board would be conducting an audit of Amy's enforcement actions over the past year. Amy stood up and said that was outrageous, and the president said she was suspended from enforcement duties effective immediately. Amy said the board did not have the authority to do that, and the president said yes they did, and if she did not comply she would be removed from the board entirely. Amy grabbed her coat and stormed out, and I heard her yelling in the lobby. The president apologized to me and said the board took the allegations seriously and they would be working with an outside attorney to review the enforcement process and make sure it was fair. He said my fines were officially waived and my record would be cleared, and the management company would be issuing a formal apology. I thanked him and asked what would happen to Amy, and he said that would depend on the investigation, but at a minimum she would no longer have enforcement authority. Tom said the board should also review the management company contract because the backdating issue was a bigger problem than just Amy. The president said they would, and he thanked Tom for coming forward. Eric and I left the building and walked to the parking lot, and I saw Amy standing near her car talking on her phone. She saw me and glared, and I heard her say something about lawyers and defamation. I ignored her and got in my car, and Eric said he would keep an eye on the group chat and let me know if she tried to retaliate. I said I appreciated everything he did, and he said he was just glad someone finally stood up to her. I drove home and checked the portal, and I saw that all my violations had been marked as under review and the fines were zeroed out. I felt a wave of relief, and I texted Tom to thank him, and he replied saying he was glad he could help. The next day, I got a call from the management company manager, and she said she wanted to apologize personally for the enforcement issues. She said the company was conducting an internal review and they had discovered that several notices had been backdated without proper authorization. She said the former manager had been pressured by Amy to expedite enforcement actions, and the company had failed to catch it. She said they were implementing new safeguards and retraining the staff, and she offered to comp my HOA fees for the next 3 months as a gesture of goodwill. I said I appreciated that, but I wanted a written confirmation that my record was clean and no liens would be filed. She said she would send that over today, and she did. The group chat exploded over the next few days, with people posting about other cases where Amy had targeted them with questionable violations. The board sent out a memo clarifying the enforcement rules and announcing that all pending cases would be reviewed by an independent third party. The memo also said the board was implementing a new appeals process and homeowners could request a hearing before any fines were assessed. Several people posted thanking the board for taking action, and a few others posted demanding Amy be removed entirely. The board did not respond publicly, but I heard from Eric that they were discussing a formal vote to remove her at the next meeting. Amy posted once more in the group chat saying she was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign and she had done nothing wrong. She said the board was caving to troublemakers and the neighborhood would regret it. The post got a few supportive comments, but most people ignored it or called her out. One person posted a screenshot of an old email where Amy had said renters were ruining the neighborhood, and another person posted a photo of a notice Amy had filed against them for a trash can placement violation that turned out to be on the wrong property. The thread turned into a pile-on and Amy stopped posting after that. A week later, I got a call from a local news reporter who said they were doing a story on HOA abuse and they had heard about my case. I said I was willing to talk, but I wanted to keep it focused on the process issues and not make it personal. The reporter said that was fine, and they came to my house and interviewed me for an hour. They also interviewed Tom and Eric, and they reached out to the management company for comment. The company declined, but they sent a statement saying they were committed to fair enforcement and they had made changes to prevent future issues. The story ran a few days later, and it got a lot of attention, with people commenting about their own HOA horror stories. The board held a special meeting and voted to remove Amy from all enforcement duties permanently, and they also voted to hire an outside firm to audit the past 2 years of violations and fines. The audit found that Amy had filed over 60 questionable notices, and the board voted to refund fines in 20 cases where the violations were clearly fabricated or improperly documented. Amy resigned from the board a week later, and the neighborhood group chat celebrated. Eric posted a photo of a bottle of champagne and said it was time to move on, and I agreed. The final twist came a month later when I got a call from the tow company owner. He said his drivers had been reviewing the work orders from the past year, and they found multiple cases where Amy had requested tows for vehicles that were parked legally. He said the company was terminating their contract with the HOA because they did not want to be associated with fraudulent enforcement. He also said one of his drivers had noticed Amy ordering staged snow photos from a contractor, and he had screenshots of the messages. I asked if he would be willing to share those with the board, and he said yes, and he sent them over that afternoon. The board forwarded the screenshots to their attorney and filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board. The attorney said Amy could face civil penalties and possibly criminal charges if the state found evidence of fraud. The board also sent out a memo clarifying the snow and ice enforcement rules and announcing that all future violations would require a site visit by a neutral third party before any fines were assessed. The memo included a footnote saying the board was committed to fair enforcement and zero tolerance for abuse, and several homeowners posted thanking them for the changes. I ran into Amy one more time at the grocery store a few weeks later. She saw me in the checkout line and walked over, and for a moment I thought she was going to yell, but instead she just said, "You got what you wanted. I hope you are happy." I said I just wanted fair enforcement, and she had made it personal. She said I had no idea what I had done, and the neighborhood was going to fall apart without her keeping standards. I said the neighborhood would be fine, and she walked away without another word. I never saw her again after that. The vendor blacklist hit the HOA hard during the next storm, because the tow company had been one of the few contractors willing to work with them on short notice. The board had to scramble to find a new company and ended up paying premium rates, and several homeowners complained about the delays. The board sent out another memo apologizing for the service issues and blaming the previous enforcement practices, and they promised to rebuild relationships with vendors over time. Eric joked that the board should send Amy the bill, and I laughed. The neighborhood settled down after that, and the group chat went back to normal posts about lost pets and garage sales. The new enforcement process worked smoothly, and the board hired a part-time compliance officer who was trained in proper procedure and conflict resolution. I kept my documentation folder just in case, but I never needed it again. Tom stayed in touch and said he was glad the board had finally cleaned house, and Eric said he felt like the neighborhood was a better place. I agreed, and I went back to focusing on my shifts and my custody schedule without worrying about surprise fines or tow trucks. The final payoff came 6 months later when the board held elections and 3 new members were voted in, all of them running on a platform of fair enforcement and transparency. The new board president sent out a welcome email saying the days of weaponized rules were over and the association would focus on community building instead of gotcha enforcement. The email got a standing ovation in the group chat, and someone posted a GIF of fireworks. I posted a simple thanks and moved on. I kept the certified statement from Tom in my files, and I made copies for Eric and for my own records. The statement had been the key to everything because it gave the board hard evidence that Amy had a pattern and a motive, and it made it impossible for her to claim the enforcement was just standard procedure. Tom said he was glad he had kept the emails and meeting notes because he knew someday they would be useful. I said I owed him a debt and he said no, he owed the neighborhood for putting up with Amy for so long. The twist about the backdated notices turned out to be bigger than anyone expected because the state HOA Oversight Board launched an investigation into the management company and found widespread problems with documentation and fee practices. The company ended up settling with multiple HOAs and agreeing to new auditing requirements, and the settlement included refunds for improperly assessed fines going back 3 years. I got a check for $800 and Eric got one for $600, and we used the money to throw a block party in the spring. Amy was not invited. The board issued a formal apology to everyone who had been targeted by Amy, and they sent out a revised handbook with clear enforcement guidelines and a new appeals process. The handbook included a section on homeowner rights and protections, and it explicitly banned retaliation against anyone who filed a complaint. The board also created a hotline for reporting abuse, and they hired an ombudsman to review enforcement actions and mediate disputes. The changes were popular, and the neighborhood felt more stable. I saw the tow truck driver one more time a few months later, and he stopped to say he was sorry for almost hooking my car. He said his company had updated their procedures to require photo verification before dispatching, and they were no longer taking work orders from HOAs without independent confirmation. He said the screenshots showing Amy ordering staged photos had been the final straw, and his boss had decided it was not worth the liability. I thanked him for standing down that morning, and he said he was glad he did, because he would have felt terrible hooking a car that was legally parked. Eric told me later that Amy had moved to a different neighborhood, and he heard she was already complaining about the HOA there. He said some people never learned, and I agreed. I also heard from Tom that the state investigation had resulted in new legislation requiring HOAs to provide annual transparency reports and independent audits, and the law was being used as a model in other states. Tom said it was a small victory, but it mattered, and I agreed with that too. The next winter came and went without incident, and I kept my walkway clear without any notices or threats. The new compliance officer did site visits on a regular schedule and left friendly reminder notes if something needed attention, but there were no fines and no gotcha enforcement. The neighborhood group chat stayed positive, and people posted photos of snow sculptures and hot cocoa instead of violation accusations. It felt like a different place, and I was grateful for that. I still work rotating shifts as a firefighter, and I still worry about missing custody time over pointless conflicts, but the HOA is no longer a threat. The board runs smooth meetings and the enforcement is fair, and I can focus on my job and my family without constantly checking the portal for surprise notices. Eric and I still joke about the tow truck morning and the frozen clipboard, and Tom still checks in every few months to see how things are going. The neighborhood feels like a community now, and that is what it should have been all along. The funny karma moment happened during the board audit when Amy showed up to contest the findings and brought a printed packet of evidence to support her case. She walked into the meeting and set the packet on the table, and a gust of wind from the open door sent the pages flying across the room. She scrambled to pick them up while the board members watched, and someone made a joke about maybe she should have used a clipboard. The room laughed and Amy turned red, and she left without presenting anything. Eric said it was the perfect metaphor for her entire tenure, and I agreed. The board issued a memo clarifying the rule Amy had weaponized, and the new rule required site visits and photographic evidence before any fines could be assessed. The memo also said homeowners had the right to challenge any notice within 72 hours, and the challenge would be reviewed by the ombudsman before any further action. The rule change destroyed Amy's favorite tactic of filing rapid-fire notices during narrow compliance windows, and several people posted thanking the board for the update. Amy was forced to apologize on the record in front of the room at a special meeting where the board presented the audit findings. She read a prepared statement saying she regretted any misunderstandings and she had always acted in the best interest of the community. But her voice was flat, and no one believed her. The board accepted the apology and closed the matter, and Amy never came to another meeting. The apology was posted in the meeting minutes and it stayed in the public record, and I kept a copy just in case I ever needed it. The policy clarification that destroyed her favorite tactic became part of the revised handbook, and it was cited in multiple other HOA disputes across the state. Tom said the clarification was being used as a template for fair enforcement, and he was proud that our case had contributed to a broader change. I said I was just glad it was over, but I appreciated that something good had come out of it. Eric said the best revenge was living well and watching the system get better, and I agreed with that too. I appreciate you supporting the channel.